Tell me you'll be mine forever. A Hatfield Falls Prequels and Extras novelette, written by Annilee Nelson, narrated by Chloe, an authorized voice replica. Chapter 1. He had been here before, standing outside the Falls Diner on a sunny Saturday afternoon, with the ever-present wind, tugging at his clothes and tossing his hair. It was, in fact, a normal thing for him to be buying lunch here on a Saturday, because Mark Bennett was not known for his cooking. To tell the truth, he was better known for his inability to cook. Even boxed macaroni and cheese met disastrous results when he was the one attempting to make it. If the past 6 months of bachelor living in a small apartment, attempting to sustain himself on his own cooking, had taught him anything, it was that he either needed a personal chef or a wife. He chuckled to himself as he shifted from one foot to the other. He could just hear his brother razzing him about the wife comment. According to his older married brother Luke, wives were not things you needed. They were blessings to be sought and treasured, and his younger sister Priscilla would support Luke in that fact 100% before adding that wives were more than chefs and maids. Mark agreed, of course, but Luke could make a mean box of mac and cheese, and Priscilla was a whiz at all things cooking related. While what his siblings said was true, it was also true that he needed someone to help him survive life. And he'd really like for that someone to be a certain pretty young lady who attended the Hatfield Falls Christian Church where he was serving as a lead pastor in training. That being said, the ring in his pocket was not a bargaining chip to get the best cook in Hatfield Falls to feed him for the rest of his life, even if his younger brother John might tease him that it was. Amy Green could be the worst cook in Hatfield Falls, though it would take some doing to be worse than he was, and he would still be standing here on a Saturday in early April, waiting for her to have lunch with him. There was just something about her that was perfect for him. It had only taken him one date to fall in love with her and start thinking about a future, with her in it. He blew out a breath as his stomach rumbled. Hunger and nerves did not mix well, and Mark was beginning to feel downright nauseous. Hopefully, before the day was through, Amy would promise to marry him, and this unsettled yet excited feeling that had surrounded him for weeks as he planned today's date would dissipate. They would, of course, marry in the late fall or maybe December, for he knew from his research that Mr. Darcy and Miss Elizabeth had married sometime before Christmas. Oh, his brothers would have a heyday if they knew Mark had spent 3 weeks researching the timeline of Pride and Prejudice, just because the cute girl that smiled at him on his first day in Hatfield Falls when he was standing just where he was now loved all things Jane Austen. His sister would find it horribly romantic and swoony. He hoped and truly suspected that Amy would side with his sister on this and not his brothers. Mark slipped his hand into his pocket and wrapped it around the ring. Perhaps he should have waited until the autumn to propose, since the spring proposal had not gone well for Mr. Darcy. But autumn was far too long to wait. As it was, he'd been sitting on the information that today was the day he would pop the question for over 3 months now. It really was too bad that Darcy fellow hadn't figured himself out sooner, and perhaps proposed at Christmas time. Finally, a small red car pulled into the parking lot. Mrs. Green, that is, Barb, was dropping her daughter off. They had been at a ladies' meeting that morning, and Barb had in no uncertain terms told Mark that Amy would meet him at the diner. "Mark," Barb called from her open window, "you'll join us for dinner tonight, won't you? Let me see, do I want to eat my terrible cooking or your delicious cookies?" As if he needed to think about that. She laughed and played along with his mock indecision. "I made chocolate chip and oatmeal raisin cookies yesterday, and I have tuna noodle casserole in the fridge just waiting to go in the oven." She most certainly knew how to sway him. Cookies and old-fashioned oven-baked casseroles were the surest way to tempt him. "Well then, that makes my decision even easier. I would love to join you for dinner." And hopefully he'd have some wonderful news to share with her by then. Of course, if things didn't go well this afternoon, it could be a rather awkward dinner. It wasn't like he could invent a fake reason to cancel. News of a lie like that wouldn't recommend him to his new congregation. Hatfield Falls Christian Church had welcomed him with open arms and a bit of skepticism. He was young, and Pastor Gautier was not. The congregation had been shepherded by Pastor Gautier for longer than Mark had been alive, so he understood their hesitance in trusting that a young whippersnapper like him was the best replacement for their trusted leader when he retired. "I would have thought that having my daughter there would be enough," Barb teased. "Oh, it is," he said as he trotted around the car to open Amy's door. "But cookies and tuna noodle casserole make it even better." Again, Barb laughed. "You know I like you, right?" "Yes, ma'am, I do." "Let's keep it that way." She winked, but there was a hint of warning in her tone. "We eat at 6. Then we'll be there by 5:45, if not earlier." He turned to Amy, who was standing next to the door to the diner. "I'll be right with you. I want to tell your mom something." Amy looked at him in confusion. "Okay?" There was uncertainty in her voice. "It's just about something we talked about a few Sundays ago." His heart beat rapidly as he prayed she wouldn't ask him what he and her mother had talked about. "Oh, okay." There was a touch less uncertainty in her tone, but her brow was still furrowed. He hurried over to Barb before she could zip away. "Today's the day," he whispered. Her eyes grew wide. "The day as in the day?" She wiggled the ring finger on her left hand. He nodded. "Do I still have your blessing?" "Have you done anything to lose it since I first gave it to you?" she replied. He shook his head. "Then you still have it," she said. "And I'll stop on the way home and pick up some ice cream, since it works for both celebration and consolation." Her lips curled into a playful grin. "And I promise not to tell anyone the good news until I know for certain that it's good news." "Thank you, both for not sharing the news and for letting me possibly join your family." "You're welcome. I'd say I'm getting the better part of the deal, but I know you'll argue that point with me." She nodded toward the diner. "You'd better go before she gets too curious, if you want to keep your plans a secret." "Right." He tapped the top of the car door where the window was down. "Thanks again." Then he turned and hurried over to Amy. Her bottom lip was pulled between her teeth, and that crease between her eyebrows had not disappeared. He knew that expression. She was trying to figure things out. "How was your week?" He tugged open the door as he presented a subject that he hoped would pull her away from her ruminations. Amy was curiosity personified at times. There was little that she could not reason out when she put her mind to something that interested her. "It was good." Her tone was absent-sounding. "All the children survived?" She blinked. "Of course they did. It's a daycare. A well-run daycare. We always keep our children perfectly safe." "There was that once," he replied, "when one of the little guys fell off the fence and broke his arm." She made a huffing, clucking sound. "We do our best to keep them safe. George was rather like a monkey." Her lips twitched. "Curious and often getting into trouble?" Mark asked. "Precisely. I'm almost sure that all naughty creatures in children's stories are written about real-life children and their antics." Mark chuckled. "I wouldn't be surprised if that was true." "How many today?" Carol, the waitress who greeted them, snapped her gum. "2. "Would you like the counter or a booth?" "A booth, please." Carol kept chewing her gum as she smiled. "That's cozy." "I hope so," Mark replied, causing Carol's eyes to grow wide. "What? There's nothing sinful about a pastor sitting in a cozy booth with his girlfriend." "As long as he doesn't get too cozy," teased Paul, the son of the owner of the diner, and who was about Mark's age, as they passed where he was sweeping the floor. "Don't worry, we'll be appropriately cozy and nothing more," Mark assured him. "Will I see you at church tomorrow?" Paul shrugged. "I have to work until close to night, and if someone calls in, I'm going to have to fill in." "But if no one calls in, will I see you in church?" Paul's head bobbed up and down and side to side as if he didn't really want to promise that he would be at church. Might be sleeping. "The pews are padded." Paul laughed and shook his head. "You don't like to take no for an answer, do you?" "Not when it comes to important things, like your relationship with God." "I thought you were going to go get cozy with your girlfriend." Okay, Mark said with a laugh. "I'll leave it at that for now, but you should know that I'm preaching tomorrow, and I'd love to have you there so you can tell me where I went wrong when I'm in here for lunch next week." You're preaching? Yep. Paul leaned on his broom as he considered that information. I liked the last time I heard you preach. He looked around as if he didn't want anyone to hear him. You're more interesting than Pastor Gautier, but don't tell him I said that. He's good. He's just, well... Paul shrugged. He reminds me of my history teacher in high school, and I didn't like history very much. How could you not like history? Amy asked. It's all stories about things that really happened. And dates and names you have to memorize, Paul countered with a shudder. I'll give you that, it's important. But I like knowing about things that are happening now rather than what happened in the past. The whole Bible happened in the past, Amy argued. But it applies to today, Mark added. Therefore, it joins history and the present. True, but the things we learned in history class often apply to what happens today. Amy was not one to let an argument just fade gently into the background if she thought she had a point to carry. Well, someone should have told my teacher that, and maybe I'd have liked the subject, Paul retorted. So are you saying that Mark does a better job of tying the Bible to the present than Pastor Gautier does? I've got another customer, Carol inserted. I'll drop your menus on the table, okay? Mark nodded his agreement. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Paul answered Amy's question as he rubbed the back of his neck. I'm not trying to be disrespectful or anything, but yeah, that's why I like Mark's preaching better. Amy pulled herself a little taller, which even then was not very tall at all. She was only 5'3" when she wore shoes with a noticeable heel. He is rather good at that, isn't he? She asked with a smile for Mark. Paul laughed. Keep flattering him, and you might just end up being a pastor's wife. Amy's cheeks grew rosy at Paul's taunt. Is that a bad thing? She fluttered her lashes at Paul, who opened his mouth and then closed it again while he shook his head. Good, she said. I didn't think it was. She wound her arm around Mark's. We should probably sit down. In your cozy booth? Paul teased as they walked away. Do you want to sit beside me or across from me? Mark asked. Across from you, of course. That way I can admire your handsomeness while we talk. Chapter 2. Amy peeked over her menu at Mark. What can you tell me about your week? It was how she always asked him about his work. She understood that the type of ministry in which he found himself employed carried with it a great measure of trust and confidentiality. She wasn't one to push those boundaries or look for things to gossip about. I spent a lot of it studying and typing up my sermon notes, Mark answered. But there were also some calls that had to be made with Pastor Gautier, and then the flower beds needed tending. He set his menu aside. He knew what he was going to get without looking. According to his stomach, today was a bacon cheeseburger with a side of home fries kind of day. You did the flower beds? I thought Mrs. Powell always did them. Amy's brow furrowed as she scanned her menu. Salad or a sandwich? A salad isn't a meal. Get the sandwich. A salad is too a meal, Amy protested. Have you seen the size of the salads they make here? Mark chuckled. Yes, I have. In fact, I ate one yesterday, but today's not a salad day. How is a day a salad day or not? He loved it when she argued with him and looked as befuddled as she did right now. The wind is a bit too brisk. That salad won't keep you warm or give you enough fuel to traipse up to the falls with me. Her look of bewilderment slid into a smile. We're taking a hike? A short one. He knew how much she loved to walk in nature. Perhaps one day they would have a son, or daughter, who would love it as much as she did. That sounds lovely. In that case, I'll have the chicken Caesar sandwich. She took a sip of her water. Why did you have to do the flower beds? That's because Mrs. Powell cut her finger. A jar broke while she was doing dishes, and the doctor who stitched her up said she shouldn't do anything too strenuous with that hand for a week. When she called the church office, she said she would be able to get to them on this coming Wednesday. But I told her I would be happy to assist her in turning things over. That way, she can just dream about the colors of the blooms she wants to put in while her hand heals. Amy sighed. I wish I could grow things like Mrs. Powell does. I'm certain she could touch a tree stump and a new tree would sprout from it. She laughed. I know that's silly, but she is so gifted. I won't deny that, he agreed before giving his and Amy's order to Carol. This is nice, Amy said as she settled back in her seat to wait for their order to be prepared. I like just sitting and talking with you. I rather enjoy it as well, he agreed. Tell me about what you were studying this week. Are you sure you want me to spoil the surprise of tomorrow's sermon? He teased. She shook her head and rolled her eyes. She was never overly formal with anyone. She seemed to always be perfectly at ease. Again, Mark thought ahead, to the possibility of having a son or daughter who would be just as easygoing, and patted the ring in his pocket. He had to be patient. The diner was not where he wanted to propose. There were no diner proposals in Pride and Prejudice. However, there were proposals in nature and at parsonages. I'm sure you studied things that won't even be mentioned in your sermon tomorrow. You always say you do. The bulletin wasn't printed yet when we left the church, or I wouldn't have to ask you. I would have sneaked a peek. He loved the feisty spirit she possessed. Please? It sounds like your kiddos at the daycare have been teaching you how to plead for something quite well. Her lips pursed and her eyes danced as she leaned forward and whispered, Oh, they're not teaching me. I'm teaching them, but don't tell their parents. I hate to interrupt, but Paul stood at the end of their table. Pops wants to know if you'd like your order to go. He handed Mark a folded piece of paper. He got a call for you. Seems like it's a good thing you're preaching tomorrow. Oh no, has something happened to Pastor Gautier? Amy asked. Mark read and reread the words on the slip of paper he held, and blew out a breath. He's at the hospital. He looked up at Amy with concern. He was having chest pains. She sucked in a quick breath. I'll go with you. She said it immediately, as if it was the most natural thing to do, before turning to Paul and adding, We'll take our food with us, and if Mark doesn't mind, could you add a BLT for Mrs. Gautier and a slice of your apple pie? I know she won't likely wish to eat now, but she might later, and I'd hate for her to have to cook. Or worse, eat what they offer at the hospital cafeteria. Their sandwiches aren't nearly as good as yours are. She looked at Mark. What do you think? He thought she knew exactly what to do in a difficult situation, and was thinking very well for someone whom he had expected to be more affected by the news than he was. I think your plan's perfect. I'll tell Pops, Paul said, and he can meet you at the cache. The man looked troubled. Is something wrong, Paul? Mark asked. He shook his head and then shrugged. I feel bad about saying what I did about his preaching. Mark scooted out from his place behind the table. You didn't do anything wrong. It's perfectly acceptable to have preferences. Even Pastor Gautier would say so. Are you sure? Mark nodded. Absolutely. I hope he gets better. I'd say I'll pray for him, but I'm not so sure God hears me. Why wouldn't he hear you? I thought you told me that you gave him your heart when you were 12. It was one of the first tough conversations Mark had broached with Paul during one of his solitary meals at the diner. I did, but I don't go to church or read my Bible like I know I should. He shook his head. You need to get going, and I need to take this to Pops. Mark put a hand on his shoulder before he could scoot away. This was not a conversation that could wait. If you hadn't visited your gran or read her letters for a while, do you think she'd hang up on you if you called? Paul's eyes grew wide and he shook his head. No. Same goes with God. Just pick up the phone, so to speak, and talk to him. He'll listen. You sure? Yep. Just like that. Nothing else I need to do, like go to church for a month or read a book of the Bible? Just like that. Huh. Paul's eyebrows rose and his lips tipped into a crooked smile. Okay, I will. And, thanks. Amy wound her arm around Mark's. That was a very wise answer, she whispered. Thanks, but I can't take credit for it. I'm pretty sure that was the Holy Spirit at work. He smiled down at her. Are you okay? Her smile faltered. I am. At least, I think so. If you want, I can take you home, instead of to the hospital. He knew that the hospital would not hold very pleasant memories for Amy, because her father had died of a heart attack there just 2 years ago. No, I need to go. Someone has to hold Mrs. Gautier's hand, and I'm good at that. My kids at work have given me lots of practice at holding hands and drying tears. You're sure you want to go? She nodded. I understand some of what she's feeling. The comment was said softly. If you're sure, I'd love to have you by my side. Forever, he added to himself. And I'd like to be there, she assured him. It's kind of my favorite place to be. Even if we're facing tough circumstances like this? Again, she nodded. I'm sorry that you have to leave before you even got served. Paul's dad stood at the cash register, waiting for them. Your order is almost ready. Carol is just boxing up Mrs. Gautier's sandwich and pie. He punched a few buttons on the machine in front of him. That'll be $10. Mark's brow furrowed. I think your cash register is broken. Mr. Lally laughed. It's not broken. I'd like to just hand you the bag and not charge you a cent. But I know you'd protest. The man did know him well. I most certainly would, but are you sure? A workman is worthy of his pay, you know. Carol slipped 2 boxes into the bag on the counter. Yes, you are, Mr. Lally agreed. That's not what I meant. Oh, I know that, but it's still true. Paul says you're preaching Sunday. I'll be listening while I cook eggs and burn the toast. He winked at Amy when she giggled. Your fella here sure was smart to get the church on the radio. I can't tell you how many of my regular Sunday morning customers appreciate it. We have a couple of delivery guys that stop for a bite every Sunday just as the singing starts. And I have to say that, for my part, it makes scheduling workers easier as there aren't as many who are hesitant to give up their Sunday sermons to wait tables or cook breakfast. Well, it only seems right that we keep up with technology and use it to extend our reach to build and add to God's family however we can. It had been a bit of a struggle to get a few of the church members to see a radio broadcast as a good thing. A few still didn't see it as something worthwhile. Mr. Lally rubbed the back of his neck. Wish it had been an option long ago. He looked toward his son, who was clearing the corner table with the wrap-around bench. We did our best, but... His words trailed off and left a feeling of regret hanging in the air. Kids are only so malleable, Amy said with a smile. They eventually exert their own will and have to find their own way. Just pray for him. Mr. Lally nodded. I do. Nearly every day. He blew out a breath. Give my best to Mrs. Gautier and her husband when you see him. I'll be praying for healing. With that said, he turned to go back to the kitchen. That was wise counsel, Miss Green, Mark said as he held the door for her to exit before him. She smiled mischievously at him. I suppose it comes from hanging around you. The wisdom just rubs right off and occasionally I catch a piece. Her laughter floated on the spring breeze. I think it comes from studying the scriptures, Mark replied with a chuckle. I only wish I had wisdom that fell from me. It would make doing this job a lot easier. He put the food on the back seat of his car as she climbed into the passenger seat. This isn't exactly the date I had planned, he said as he slipped into his place behind the wheel. That ring in his pocket might have to remain there until he could replan. He shook his head at the disappointing thought. It's fine, she said. I don't mind this. I mean, I'd rather that Pastor was not in the hospital and all, but I don't mind that we won't get to take a hike or that we'll have to eat our sandwiches from a box in a waiting room. This is who you are. It's what God has called you to be. She clicked her seatbelt into place. Now, Pastor Bennett, you were attempting to avoid answering my question about what you studied this week when our plans got reshuffled. She turned so that she was looking more at him and less out the front window. Will you tell me on the way to the hospital? I suppose I can, but don't blame me if you fall asleep before we get across town. Hatfield Falls isn't that big. I'm sure you'd have to drive there and back 3 times before I'd nod off. He chuckled as he backed out of his parking spot. God truly knew what he was doing when he had made Mark such a horrid cook that he had to try out the Falls Diner on his first day in Hatfield Falls, because that was when he had first met Amy, the lady whom God had put in his path to meet, and she was perfect for him, absolutely perfect, for she was wise and supportive, but also knew how to be just a touch cheeky when he needed his mood lightened. Let me see. What did I learn this week that might not be boring? The gentle knick-knock of the turn signal filled the air as Mark thought. "Oh, I know," he said as he turned onto the road. "Did you know that in ancient times there was a ship railway that they used to move small boats of goods across the Isthmus of Corinth?" From her delighted cry of surprise, he was certain he had hit upon the perfect topic to keep them both entertained while they drove. Chapter 3. Mark felt Amy's hand tighten in his as they approached the hospital entrance. An ambulance stood with its doors open just down the drive from them as a pair of paramedics unloaded a patient on a stretcher. "I can take you home," he offered once again in a whisper. She shook her head and smiled at him. It was a tight expression that didn't touch her eyes. "I need to be here." "No, you don't." "Yes, I do." She expelled a deep breath. "I need to do this for myself as much as I need to do it for Mrs. Gautier." "Have you been here since your dad died?" She shrugged. "To see a couple of new babies, but that's not the same." No, he supposed it wasn't. Seeing a new life beginning was far less of a reminder of the loss of a beloved father than visiting the floor where the doctors and nurses tended to more serious illnesses and emergencies would be. "Want to go sit on one of the benches over there and eat our sandwiches before we go in?" He nodded with his head toward a small treed park area to the right of the main entrance. "That way we won't have to eat around people who might be dealing with some pretty difficult stuff. And we could pray before we get in there." He really should have thought about suggesting prayer before now. A twinge of doubt about his abilities to be a pastor in charge of a large congregation crept into his mind, and he expelled a breath. "Are you okay?" Amy asked him. "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just thinking about what this means if Pastor Gautier has to retire or something." She gave his hand a tug and started toward the bench he had indicated. "Let's eat. I'm sure Mrs. Gautier won't mind waiting for us for just a few more minutes." He walked with her to the park area and selected a bench in the middle of the space. For him, she would change plans in a moment, but for herself? He wasn't sure they would be sitting on this bench if it was just to make things easy for her. She could be that way at times, stubbornly self-sacrificing. "The message did say to finish our lunch," he said as he took a seat next to her on the bench. "Did it?" Amy spread a napkin across her lap. "You didn't mention that part." "You had decided we were leaving before I could." "Well, Paul wanted to know if we were going to get our order to go, so I just assumed." She gave him a wry smile. "Assuming is not a good thing to do. Mom always says that, and I always forget it until after I have already assumed something. It's an easy enough thing to do." He held out one of his hands to her while keeping the other on his takeout container so it wouldn't slide off his lap. "Heavenly Father," he began to pray as soon as Amy's hand was in his, "thank you for this food, and thank you for Amy's willingness to come with me to the hospital. Give her peace, Father, and give the doctors and nurses wisdom and guidance as they treat Pastor. Surround his wife with your comfort and your love. Amen." A sniffle caught his attention as he was opening his eyes. "What's wrong?" "I was just thinking about Mrs. Gautier." She shook her head. "How can I be concerned with my own feelings instead of hers? Her trouble right now is far greater than mine." Mark put his food on the bench next to him and put his left arm around her shoulders. "Hey, we're humans, right? We all have feelings, and it's not like they get to take turns like kids waiting to play on the slide. I know what you're facing going in there and down those halls where your dad spent his final moments." He rubbed her shoulder where his left hand lay. "I was actually just thinking a few minutes ago about how I don't know if I'm ready to lead a church by myself if it comes to that. I mean, I know I've had the training and a little experience under Pastor's watchful eye, but I didn't immediately think to pray about this situation. Disappointment over our date not going as planned was at the forefront of my mind when it maybe shouldn't have been." He stopped rubbing her shoulder and used that hand to tip her head towards him so he could kiss the side of her head. "We all struggle. None of us will be perfect. At least not while here on earth." "You'll be a great pastor," she assured him. "You already are. And you'd make a great pastor's wife." This was probably not the best place to even raise the subject, but then again, It seemed the perfect time to say what he had said. "Someday," she replied. "When you're ready." "When the time is right," he said, rather than asking her to marry him while they were there, sitting on a park bench in front of the hospital. He cupped her cheek with his right hand. "When the time is right," he repeated before giving her a quick kiss. "Now we should eat." Not that he would rather eat than kiss her again, but it seemed the proper thing to do. "I suppose we should." Her tone sounded as disappointed as he felt. At least he knew he had little to fear about her answer to his proposal. He just wanted that moment when she finally said yes to be perfect for her. She deserved to have a story to share that would make her friends sigh as they listened to it and looked at her ring. Not everyone would find something like that important, but he knew she had a fanciful imagination at times, and based on her love of Jane Austen and weddings, he suspected she was someone who would revel in such a thing. And he wanted to give that to her. He wanted to give her anything and everything that would make her happy. True happiness is not found in people. He bit into his bacon cheeseburger, which was surprisingly still quite tasty despite being somewhat cold. "What was that?" she asked. "What was what?" "What did you just say about happiness?" His eyes grew wide. "Oh, well, I guess I didn't realize that I said that out loud. I was just thinking about happiness and how it isn't found in people." "It's better to find it in people rather than things," she countered before taking a dainty bite of her sandwich. He chuckled. "I suppose, but it still shouldn't be dependent on a person either." She peeked at him and gave him a teasing grin. "Unless that person is Jesus." This time he laughed aloud. "True, which is where my thoughts were leading me." "See? You'll do fine with or without Pastor Gautier." He imagined the smile that she gave him as she said that was much like one that she would give one of the preschoolers she taught when they got something right. While some might find that to be offensive because they might think she was treating him like a child, he knew better. This was her "I have faith in your abilities" smile that she used when she wanted someone whom she cared about to know that she believed they'd be a success. It was also a smile that reminded him of just how fortunate he was to have her in his life. He put his arm around her shoulders and gave her a quick squeeze to thank her. "Pastor Bennett?" "Yes?" Mark looked up to see a fellow who was just about his age and whom he recognized from his realtor's office, crossing the grass towards him. "Tom, what brings you to the hospital? Nothing serious, I hope." Tom laughed. "No, it's nothing serious. One of Sandy's clients had a baby, so I'm just here to pick Sandy up and take her home since her car is in the shop." "Oh, that's a lovely reason to be here," Amy said. Tom nodded as he muttered his agreement. Then he stuck his hand out to Amy. "Tom Ahern, my girlfriend Sandy has been helping Mark find a house." "Oh." Amy looked at Mark in surprise as she shook Tom's hand. "That's nice. I hope she's been successful." Mark grimaced. Was I not supposed to say that? Tom rubbed the back of his neck. Apparently, Tom had heard the tinge of annoyance in Amy's voice just like Mark had. "Well," Mark began, "I haven't told Amy about that yet. I had planned to do so this afternoon, but things have gone a bit sideways." Deciding it was best to clear up what he could as soon as possible, so that Amy's feelings of being excluded from something important in his life could be assuaged before they grew, Mark turned to Amy. "I met Tom the other day when I was at the real estate office, the one that's over off Main. Sandy was busy working up a contract for a client and I was early. I've been looking for a house, but wanted to wait to tell you until I had something sort of solid in mind." There. Hopefully that was enough of the truth to satisfy her. He would tell her the rest later. "Tom, this is my girlfriend, the one I mentioned that day, Amy Green." "Ugh," Tom drew the word out. "I see." He shook his head as if utterly irritated with himself. "Sorry for ruining the surprise." "You haven't ruined all of it," Mark assured him. That ring was still in his pocket after all, and remained a secret from most. Tom didn't look convinced. "Just the same. I'm sorry." "What brings you to the hospital?" he asked, changing the subject. "Pastor Gautier had some chest pains and is here. So we're on our way to see him and his wife. As soon as we finish our lunch." "Oh man, that's not good." "He sounded like a great guy from what you told me. I hope he's going to be okay." Tom blew out a breath. My old man died, from a heart thing. How long ago, Amy asked. This past Christmas Eve. He answered. Amy sucked in an audible breath. That's not very long ago. Nah, it isn't, and you would have never expected him to go that way. He was a running fiend. Ran in several marathons and everything. It was a real shocker to everyone. I'm so sorry for your loss, Amy said. It really doesn't matter if the loss comes out of the blue or is one that is expected. It hurts just as much. Tom's lips tipped up into a smile that was higher on the right than the left. I suppose you're right on that. I don't think I would have been any better prepared to face his death if I had known it might happen. I don't think I would have been better prepared if my dad had died of a lingering disease rather than a heart attack, Amy agreed. But I do have one small comfort, and that's that I'll get to see him again someday. Tom's brow was furrowed. You mean in heaven? Mark knew from their discussion at Sandy's office that the man had grown up in church, but had decided to follow his own path as soon as he could, once he was out on his own. Yeah, in heaven. Amy's smile as she said it was not happy nor sad, but rather peaceful as she turned her eyes toward the hospital. Thank you, she said to Tom. I needed that reminder. Tom blinked, obviously startled by Amy's comments. I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about. He gave Mark a look that said he wasn't sure if Amy was completely sane or not. We're eating out here because I was afraid to go in there. She pointed to the hospital. I haven't been in the wing where my dad died since it happened 2 years ago. Well, that makes sense. Going back to a scene like that isn't easy, Tom agreed. No, it's not, but it also doesn't have to be as hard as I was thinking it would be. And that's because I have the hope of seeing my dad again. She blew out a breath. I know that my heart will ache as I am reminded of the loss by the familiar surroundings. But our discussion reminded me that Dad's in heaven, worshiping his Savior in person. And so I'm thanking you for being heaven's messenger and delivering that reminder to me. Me, heaven's messenger? Tom grinned. I can tell you don't know me if you can call me that. Amy seemed undaunted by the comment. God can use anything and anyone to accomplish his good purposes. Tom stopped grinning. Even me? Amy nodded. Even though I don't believe that Jesus stuff? Even then. He shook his head. I can see how you two are perfect for each other. Just a couple of Jesus freaks, right? Mark put his arm around Amy's shoulder. Tom was right. They were a good pairing. Not to be rude, but yeah. Tom shook his head again. And neither of you seem offended by that. We're not, Amy replied. Are we? Mark smiled at her and shook his head. Not at all, he assured her before turning back to Tom. I'm sure there are far worse things we could be called, and I'm the one who dubbed us with the name, not you. Tom simply stood silently looking at them for a moment. You don't fit, he muttered. What don't we fit? Mark asked. What I thought a Christian was. I've only ever known angry ones, or ones who were trying their best to be thought of as anything but a Jesus freak. He scratched a spot behind his left ear as his face scrunched in thought. Are there more like you at your church? I suppose there are more like us, as well as a few like you've always known. We're just a bunch of sinners, trying to serve our Savior, and at different stages of learning to walk like him. Tom's brow furrowed, and then he shrugged. Maybe, if I can talk Sandy into it, we'll come visit your church some week. Mark's preaching this week, and he's quite good. Tom smiled. I suppose you would think so. No, really, I'm not saying that just because he's my boyfriend. Amy gasped. Oh, you know you could check out his preaching and see if I'm right without having to come to church. I can? Tom wore a wary look. Yep, on the radio. Amy reached for her purse and dug out a pen and notepad. Here, this is the station number and call letters, and this is the time the service starts. There's usually 20 minutes of prayer and singing and then another 40 or so minutes of preaching, so you can be a bit late if needed, and no one will know. A smile split her face and danced in her eyes as she held out the paper to Tom, who took it cautiously. Okay, he said slowly, maybe I'll listen. This week, Amy said. Mark might be preaching next week too, but we won't know for sure until we go inside and see what the doctors have to say and how bad things are. I'm going to volunteer to preach, even if the doctor gives the all-clear for Pastor to be back at it next week," Mark inserted. Tom was starting to look like a rabbit wishing for a place to hide. "And like I said at Sandy's office, there's no pressure. I'll be your friend either way, with Christ or without." "Sorry if I got a little pushy," Amy said quickly. "I just get so excited about hearing Mark preach." Tom laughed. "You should probably keep her close," he teased Mark. "I'm not sure how many cute females there are out there who get excited about preaching." Mark laughed along with Amy and Tom. "And she can cook like nobody's business," Mark added. "I'm pretty sure those two things alone make her perfect for me. Tell Sandy that I said hello and that I might be a bit late returning that thing I borrowed from her." Next to the ring in his pocket, there was a key to a possible parsonage. He had told Sandy he would have that key back to her before 6 tonight. "Will do." Tom waved as he walked away. "Did I go too far?" Amy whispered. Mark shook his head. "Nah, I think he actually might keep that piece of paper and not throw it away." He'd also bet that Tom wouldn't forget Amy anytime soon, and that was a good thing if it kept Christ at the forefront of the man's mind. Mark looked toward the hospital. "Are you ready?" "2 more bites," she replied. He pulled her to him. "2 more bites, and then we'll go face whatever is in there together. But first, I think I'd like to kiss you." "Here? In public?" She wore a look of feigned surprise. He nodded. "People will think we're serious about each other." There was a teasing sparkle in her eyes. "People would be right," he said before he did as he had said he wished to do and kissed her. Chapter 4. "Thank you both so much for coming." Mrs. Gautier stood before Mark could get comfortable in a chair in the waiting room when he returned there, after having seen Pastor. It almost seemed as if she was in a rush to have them leave. Perhaps she was just anxious to get back to her husband's side. "We're just happy to know that Pastor is doing okay," Mark replied. She gave Amy a hug. "The sandwich and pie were so thoughtful." "Call if you need anything," Mark said, "and remind your husband that he has nothing to worry about as far as the church business goes. I'll see to things for as long as he wishes for me to do so." Mrs. Gautier smiled at him the way his mom always did when she was pleased with something he had done. "I'll tell him. And I'm sure he'll be appreciative right after he gets done grumbling about having to admit that he isn't able to keep up his schedule as he's always done." She laughed lightly. "I'm really happy you got to see him and talk to him, Mark. I know it will help his mind rest more easily." She glanced at Amy. "His retirement really must be considered. I'm sure that won't be an easy topic to broach. But I do think he'd be leaving the church in very good hands. Young hands, but not ones without wisdom and a love for the Lord." Retirement from pastor's position at Hatfield Falls Christian Church had come up in Mark's discussion with Pastor Gautier. His wife didn't need to worry too much about it being a difficult talk to begin, for it had been Pastor who had brought it up and who seemed quite willing to consider moving the date up from 2 years from now to as soon as possible. Retirement from all Christian service, on the other hand, wasn't an option. The man had plans for what he called his golden years of harvesting. As he had said, a servant of the Lord doesn't ever stop being his servant, Mark. He just shifts his position in the kingdom. He might not be the mouth any longer. He might be the hand, writing God's truths and sharing them. Or he might be the heart that shows compassion to those reaching the end of their lives. There is always work to do, and we must be about it, from the moment of salvation to the last moment before we meet our Savior face to face. This had been followed by a short message on the blessing of having a co-worker in the form of a wife. There was still, after nearly 45 years of marriage, a strong, loving relationship between Pastor and Mrs. Gautier. They had a common goal, a focus on showing the love of God to all they met. The message had ended with an apology for having derailed Mark's plans for the day and a challenge to seize the blessing set before him despite the setbacks. "Your trust in my abilities is appreciated," Mark said to Mrs. Gautier. He had always known it was going to be difficult to fill Pastor's shoes when the time came, but he still wished that he had been granted more time to get comfortable in those shoes before having to put them on completely. I'll tell you what I told your husband. I pray that I can live up to not only your trust, but also the responsibility that God has given me. Oh, Mark, just keep God at the center and you'll do very well. Her head tipped from side to side. Maybe not without some bumps and stumbles, hopefully, not any that are too large, but you'll do well even in the rough patches if you keep him at the center of your focus and use his word as your guide. She laughed lightly and waved her hand as if clearing the air. Listen to me getting all sappy and sentimental. We're not leaving yet. I still plan to see you on Sunday and many days after that. But when you've been a pastor's wife for as long as I've been, you start to see all the people in your congregation as family. The young ones, like yourself and Amy, become children. And I just can't help myself when a moment of encouragement and instruction presents itself. I have to take it. Perhaps it's just my husband's ways rubbing off on me. She laughed again. I'm sure you were given an earful of advice when you were in speaking with him. I was, and I was happy to hear it both from him and from you. He held his hand out to Amy. Will you call me later so that I can know what the plans are for Pastor's treatment and can share them with the church? Of course, dear. She winked at Amy. Have fun finishing your interrupted date. Oh. That was probably also a reason for her to want to send them on their way quickly, rather than sitting and chatting as Mark had expected. We plan to, Amy assured her. And with that, they left the family waiting room. She's going to have her lunch and then go sit with her husband. Amy gripped Mark's hand firmly as they walked down the hall side by side. How are you handling being here? He hadn't had much time with her, only the walk up to the room, and then a few minutes speaking to Mrs. Gautier in the waiting room before he went to see her husband. It's not quite as hard as I had imagined. I can't say there isn't a lump in my throat that's been there since we arrived, but it hasn't choked me. Not a tear has fallen, though they have been close. I think I was too focused on Pastor's wife to wallow in my own feelings. Ah, so then does that mean I should refrain from speaking about them? She laughed. No, I'm fine, truly. What happened here those years ago is sad. But not everything that happens here is tragic. God is present everywhere. Even here, He's working through the hands and minds of all the staff. But as Mrs. Gautier said, when the Lord sends His invitation to join Him in glory, it would be foolish to refuse. And that's what I've been thinking about when my dad crossed my mind. In my opinion, his invitation came way too early, but it came, and he accepted it. He wasn't taken from me here. He was called away. His work was done. Not that I necessarily agree that he didn't have more to do, like meeting you and taking care of Mom, but... She let her words trail off with a shrug. Yeah, it's hard to accept the things we wish hadn't happened, Mark agreed. And you know you're allowed to feel grief and even anger at being left without him, right? God can handle our emotions and give comfort and peace that no human could give. Amy rested her head on his shoulder as they stood silently in the elevator, watching the numbers light up from 3 to 1. We might have time to take a walk in the park, Mark said as the number 1 was lit up, but I don't think we'll have time to get all the way to the falls. The elevator doors opened and Mark held the door open as Amy exited and a lady in a wheelchair that was being pushed by a fellow dressed in the scrubs of a hospital aide entered. I'm okay with whatever, Amy said as she took his hand again. But I do like walking on nice days like today. Then a walk it'll be, followed by a drive to see the house that he had the key for. It really is a great day for a walk. She agreed. The wind has stayed low and the sun is warm, though I suppose it will soon begin to get cool as the sun starts to sink. It is after 4 already. He held the car door open for her as he agreed. Then he trotted around the back of the car and slipped into his own place inside it. Will you be warm enough? I think I have an extra hoodie in the trunk if you want it. I'm sure I'll be fine, Amy assured him. He put the key in the ignition and turned it. The car made a sad clicking sound and nothing else. That doesn't sound right, Amy said. No, it doesn't. Mark blew out a breath. This day was so not going to plan. He tried turning the key again, but the result was the same. I don't know why it's not starting. Did you have your lights on? I remember my dad forgot to turn them off once, and then the car wouldn't start. He shook his head as he looked down at the dial for the lights on the turn signal handle and groaned. The line indicating if the lights were on or off was lined up with the illuminated light symbol. I must have turned them on out of habit and forgotten. Maybe someone could do that thing with the cables, Amy suggested hopefully. Another groan emanated from Mark. I lent my cables to Pat because he's been having car troubles and couldn't get it looked at until after payday next week. Pat was a church member with 3-month-old twin daughters and a wife who was no longer working. Adjusting to the new financial realities of their life had been more challenging than he had expected. Just as Mark was about to open his door, a lady dressed in a blue sweater knocked on his window. "Can I help you?" Mark asked. "No, I just noticed that your left rear tire looks low on air." His tire was low on air? Could anything else happen to derail his plans? As much as he wanted to loudly vent his aggravation with the situation in which he found himself, he didn't. Instead, he forced a smile and thanked the lady. "My husband will be out soon. He gets off in 15 minutes. He can help you change it if you want." "He works here?" She nodded. "He manages the coffee shop." She lifted the cup she held. "One of the perks of only having one car. I get a free coffee when I pick him up." Mark climbed out of the car. "I take it you like coffee?" "So much," she replied, "especially from Timmy's." "I've heard many a coffee drinker say the same." He held out his hand to her. "Mark Bennett, and this," he motioned to Amy, who had also gotten out of the car, "is Amy Green, my girlfriend." "Tammy," she said, taking his hand. "Tammy Johnson." "Thank you for telling me about the tire. I'll dig out my tire-changing stuff and see how it goes. But I might take you up on that offer of your husband's help, since I haven't had to change a tire in years. I'm parked over there, it's the red one." She motioned to a car in the next row behind him, and over 2 spots to the right. "I'd offer my own help, but I've never done it. My dad showed me how back when I was in high school, but that's been more years ago than I'd like to admit to." "No problem, you go enjoy your coffee." "Wait," Amy said. "Do you have those cable thingies? Our battery is dead. The lights got left on." "Oh, for sure. I'm positive I've got some jumper cables in the trunk, and those I do know how to use." "No rush," Mark said. "I shouldn't go anywhere on that tire right now anyway. I'll pull the car over to the spot next to you." A half-hour later, with the assistance of Jack, Tammy's husband, Mark's car was running and had a spare tire on it so it could limp home. "I'd say the walk is off the agenda completely," Mark said as he pulled into traffic. He wanted to take Amy to see the house he was planning to buy, but he also didn't trust his car to not play some other trick on him. Maybe this was not the day that he was meant to propose to Amy. "Are you okay?" He glanced at Amy. "Why?" He wasn't. He was currently questioning God in his mind as he drove towards Amy's house. "You don't look it. You keep shaking your head and you haven't said anything in 3 minutes." Well, if she had noticed his mood, he wasn't going to deny it. Do you ever wonder why God messes with your plans, when you know that what you want to do is what He wants you to do? Her brow furrowed. "I suppose. Well, that's how I'm feeling. Frustrated." "There will be other days when we can go on a hike." He shook his head. "Not that are this close to Easter, and I refuse to wait until autumn." "Why would we have to wait until autumn to take a hike?" "It was more than just a hike." He pulled his car into her driveway. "I had planned a special surprise for you." "You had?" Her face lit up with her smile. She loved surprises. It really was too bad that his surprise for her had been ruined. "Yeah, and now it's not going to happen as I had planned it." He pulled the house key out of his pocket. "This is the house key I have to give back to my realtor." He placed it in her hand. "She has the paperwork all drawn up, and I've received a tentative acceptance of an offer on that house. It's over in the new development just down from the church. It's a 2-story farmhouse style, the kind you like, and it has 5 big bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, and a huge kitchen." "And you're planning on buying it?" "Only if you like it." He turned to face her as much as one could in a car. I thought it could be our own little Pemberley. Her eyes were wide and she looked between the key she held and him. He pulled out the ring that was in his pocket and held it out to her. You must allow me to tell you how… something. I love you. He squeezed his eyes closed. He had this memorized. What was that word the Darcy fellow used? How ardently I love and admire you, Amy asked softly. Mark smiled and laughed at himself. Of course she would know. Yes, that's it. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I love and admire you. I have since the day we met. It's been torture waiting until Easter to propose. I wanted to propose to you after our first date. I know that seems rash and unwise and all of those things, but I've known from then that you were the… He searched his mind for the correct wording. Ugh, he sighed. I don't remember the pretty speech I had prepared. He had spent hours with videos and novels composing an Austen hero-worthy proposal, but that, like all his other plans for this day, was not to be. He'd have to just go with his own regular guy and not a dashing hero words. Amy, I love you, and I can't imagine doing my life without you by my side. I want you to be the mistress of my home and the mother of my children. But more than that, I want you to walk beside me as we work to build God's kingdom here on earth. This isn't how or where I wanted to ask you this, but will you marry me? Please tell me that you'll be mine forever. Her eyes shimmered with tears. Yes, Mr. Bennett, I would be delighted to marry you. She held her hand out to him and let him put the ring on her finger. He kissed her fingers as he had seen the heroes do in some of the historical movies they had watched together. You, my dear woman, have made me the happiest of men. That's how it said, right? She giggled. Yes, that's perfect. It was all just perfect. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. In that moment, everything that had seemed a muddled mess to him today began to fade away as he kissed her, there in his car, instead of in the living room of their future parsonage. And a deep peace and joy settled on him. His imperfectly perfect future with Amy here in Hatfield Falls was just beginning, and oh, what a future it would be. This has been Tell Me You'll Be Mine Forever, a Hatfield Falls Prequels and Extras novelette, written by Annilee Nelson, narrated by Chloe, an authorized voice replica. The 2022 copyright for Tell Me You'll Be Mine Forever is held by Annilee Nelson, all rights reserved.